Yeah, I've known Rudy for probably what, 20 years now, I guess.
You've
I would
known
think
him that
so,
long?
yeah.
I'm sorry?
You've known him 20 years?
Yes. We were both in, I'm still officially a member, I guess, of the photographers group in, it's in Orange County. We have meetings down there at the Irvine Fine Arts Center and would meet once a month. And people could bring in, what, five, I think it was 5 photos to have critiqued. Um, and Rudy, you're at UC Irvine, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, and I never knew you're a professor. What's your official title?
Official title is I'm a staff member. I manage the photo facilities, and then I'm a part-time lecturer.
Okay,
So I
very good.
teach about 4 classes a year
Okay, that's great.
And where do you teach, Rudy?
at UC Irvine.
At UC Irvine. Oh, how
Mhm.
wonderful. Okay. Very
Yeah.
cool.
So as far
Any
as
questions?
photographic background is concerned, I don't have a degree in photography per se, but it shows up as a bachelor's degree in visual arts
Mhm.
and a master's degree in studio art. So within those realms, both the schools I attended, UC San Diego and UC Irvine, have interdisciplinary programs. So they're not compartmentalized into any particular medium. So we always had the ability and the freedom to explore other art forms that would suit our concepts. And so it wasn't always about photography for me. In fact, my thesis show was non-photographic, but my other shows in terms of exhibiting have been all photo-based work.
And what other mediums have you worked in?
Primarily video and installation.
Installation of what is
Well,
that?
installation is kind of a catch-all phrase for kind of sculptural base or 3D type of work in a physical space where you can organize stuff. It's inexact in terms of narrowing or defining it, but it can be most anything.
Do you
It's
think
not
that
stuff that
the
is on the wall generally, right? It's basically 3D. It's sitting on the floor or something like that.
Yeah, or hanging from the ceiling,
Right.
or coming out of the wall.
Mhm.
It's almost anything goes, and you can combine it with photo, video, any other art form. So usually it's very interdisciplinary approach to art making.
do you feel that or how do you feel that having that broad uh, uh, background in so much art has helped your photography?
It has. I'll give you one example. When I was looking for graduate programs, my internal debate was around whether or not to go to a program that emphasized photography or one that was interdisciplinary. And I think I made the right choice for me in choosing an interdisciplinary program because I was exposed to other artists who are working in other mediums, and it expanded my vocabulary for one, but it also added a perspective that I could apply to photography. And it may sound a little bit non-intuitive in that regard, but one of my most recent projects, I took photographs of kind of a nondescript architectural areas around where I work actually, and then with Photoshop turned them into something completely different and unrecognizable. I don't know if Jim saw those.
Yes. Yeah, I saw them. They're really fantastic, Rudy.
Yeah, thank you.
Where,
But I think that
where
was an
can we see
outgrowth.
those if we want to look at them, Rudy?
My website would be a good place.
Okay, and what is that website?
It is rudyv.myportfolio.com.
Is that done through Adobe's portfolio?
It is. If all of you have an Adobe account, a photography-based one, you actually get up to 5 different websites you can design. And I actually use it in my teaching. Because I teach Photoshop as well. And I have students make a final portfolio via a website that Adobe provides via purchase of the subscription.
Right.
And it's pretty easy to assemble. It's all template based, so you don't have to know any specific web building skill set, or you don't have to have a web building skill set. So it's I find it very useful, fairly intuitive, but once you get the hang of it, it's not too bad. It's
Yeah.
primarily kind of drag and drop.
Right. It's data driven basically. So
Yep.
you can change things, just drag and drop into whatever portfolio you want, and then delete anything. So
Okay, we're 7:05, so I'm gonna start the meeting with some brief information.
Okay.
So welcome. Hi, Penny. You're the only one I haven't said hi to. Howdy. And Ed, I'm sure you're there. So there was a board meeting last night and some key decisions have been made. So I'll just run through them quickly. The board has decided that for 2023, all of our competitions will be virtual. In other words, they will all be digital.
Left turn is the Thompson
We will not have
Road here.
print competition. We may do some print image evaluations in our program meetings, so we will continue to have once a month program meetings at Merrill Gardens. And since I am probably going to be your vice president next year and doing the programs, we'll have many opportunities to look at print images and do some fun things with those and a bunch of other things. Okay, next.
I do. No, we've
Yes.
done it this side.
I think that's Ed.
hey, Ed,
Ed and Penny
Okay.
were here.
All right, all this will go out in the galleon, so I'm just giving you a heads up. We had voting on the themes for next year, and I'm going to tell them to
I'll
you,
be
and they'll be
there
in the galleon.
Frontage.
In March, the theme will be minimalism. In June, the theme will be in the street of a city. And in September, the theme will be animals. Next on the things to discuss, the holiday party will be on December 17th, not on December 10th. We've changed the venue to the Decker residence. And so the next galleon will have some information about how to get to our location. The party will start at 4:30 and with dinner at 5:30.
Norman says it is.
We do live at the end of a.
We are.
Penny, could you mute, please?
I think she is. Well, maybe not. I see her.
Okay.
There she goes. Okay.
Someone's
Mile down.
Because there's some voices going on in the background. Okay, so Penny Powell had suggested that because we live on a 1 mile drive that's rather treacherous, that maybe we will caravan out at the end of the party so that everyone can make sure they get out to the Fox and Canyon, to the main road. So we'll make sure all that goes well. Also, tentatively, our banquet will be January the 14th. That is not definite yet because the location is yet to be determined and make sure that they can do that. But you can, if you're writing down things and planning for the future, probably the 14th of January. The next meeting will be in 2 weeks. And I do want to emphasize this. It is not 4 weeks like usually between competitions, 2 weeks. And in 2 weeks, we will have a print competition and it will be at Merrill Gardens. So on November the 2nd, print competition, Merrill Gardens. Our judge will be Mark Velasquez. Thank you, Tony, for helping us to connect to Mark. So
what categories are they? Just monochrome?
yeah, monochrome and color.
But
Are
not
you
small.
right? Just monochrome and color images, just like we did with the last one.
Tell me what else.
I think that's the end of my announcements. Most of this will also appear in the galleon soon. So, or if you have any questions, please email me. Our slate for officers, I did want to say that our slate for officers will send that out. And if you have any objections to it, you need to email me. Otherwise, by acclamation, those folks will be our officers for next year. So you'll see what that is coming up soon. If any of you have not been tagged to be on the board or a position and you want one, please let me know. Okay, so let's go forward here with our competition so we don't keep Rudy any longer than we must. We certainly appreciate that you are judging for us. And I want to say again, his website is rudy.myportfolio, or is it portfolio or portfolios.com?
Singular.
Singular, myportfolio.com. And so you can see some of his work, and I'm kind of excited to see that what you did with those architectural images. So I will be looking there for sure. So let's go forward here with our competition. Drum roll. Let me turn it over to Frank. Thank you.
Okay.
Explain what we're going to do.
Yeah, I will.
Yeah.
Let me bring it up. Rudy, just to remind you, I know you've done this in the past. We will step through all the images for monochrome or color first so that everybody can see what the competition is. Then we will return to the first image. Jim will announce the name of the image, and then we'll ask you to give us your comments and your score for the image. Don't worry about ties, scoring. We will resolve that at the end of each session. So we're going to step forward now, and okay, we have 19 images.
Okay, this is Cool Sundown.
So with this, you want me to go ahead and start?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Okay. With the good use of the silhouette and the reflection on this one, the monochromatic palette works really well in kind of isolating the figure, but keeping a kind of harmonious color palette. The quality of light, with the sun setting over the horizon, kind of going backlighting the subject matter, works very, very well. The choice of the shutter speed, freezing the horse in mid-stride, as well as the waves in between, kind of a motion blur and a freeze is spot on. I liked how the horizontal banding, I'm moving my mouse as if you guys could see it, which of course you can't. But I like how it's divided into thirds, with the bottom third kind of occupying the reflection. And then the middle third is where the horse primarily resides. And then up in the sky section where you just have the silhouette of the figure in profile. The only thing I'd say that I would probably like to see, because it is more or less a square without the benefit of actually measuring the four sides. Sometimes we move things off center because we think it's the right thing to do, because oftentimes you get criticized for having things too centered. But in this case, I think it almost calls for a centered composition. And it wouldn't have been hard to necessarily try it. At this stage, is it appropriate to ask questions of the producer, or should we move on from that?
They can ask questions after the judging.
Okay. Yeah, so in terms of composition, I perhaps maybe would have liked to have it dead centered, just because in the square format especially, I think you can play with symmetry a little bit with a greater degree. And I already like, as mentioned, how it's divided up into 3 distinct horizontal bands. And it's good time of day. It's pretty well resolved in my opinion. And total score is a 19.
Okay.
This one exhibits it's nice bokeh. It's a nice shallow depth of field. So the out of focus areas are the kind of the first thing to come that pops out and makes itself noticeable. And then of course the small bird perched on this little platform there is nice. The only thing I would say, when it's animal or human is facing outside the frame, which adds to expanding the frame a little bit, I usually recommend it being the more space to that directional gaze. In other words, there's more space behind the bird to our right as we're looking at the picture. And it's not space that is important or that you well utilized, where it could benefit a little bit more from the composition being shifted to the front of the bird. So it would probably make it, the way it's situated now feels just a little bit crowded. I do like the color palette and the emphasis, that nice blue of the bird's head stands out really well. And the diagonal of the branch in the background, not too busy, calls of attention, just to provide a little bit, a kind of a dynamic element to the picture overall. In terms of the score, I gave it a 14.
Okay. Jim, you're supposed to announce the names.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. I forgot. This is Curious Bluebird.
No,
No,
this one is different. That's the next one, Jim.
Don't throw me off,
Yeah.
Jim.
Yeah, no, this one is called Early Bird.
Early bird, right. Yeah, this one I think works well. This is a good example of where the leading item, in this case the boat, is actually headed to the vast openness of the actual sea or body of water. I like this one as well in terms of, again, the horizontal banding. You got that nice little kind of yellowish foreground, and then you got the middle ground with the kind of a lighter shade of blue. Then you got this thin little bit of horizon, and then calling or announcing the intention of the sky, which is kind of a nice muted color scheme and good cloudscapes as well. I also like on the far right how the outcropping of the land on the mid right is kind of offset by the marine layer on the left, so creating a nice balance. I like the water trail, the wake of the water behind the boat as well, kind of nice added feature. It adds a little bit of contrast to it, when otherwise the image is kind of soft, muted. But I think it's effective. I like the framing and the choice of the aspect ratio to make it more panoramic. And with this one, there's not really a lot that I would say in terms of how I might do it differently. For example, it really, I think, resolves and represents the quality of the light. And Early Bird is an apt title to it. You know, it really gives the sense of the morning light and the kind of solitude. Very peaceful, very well executed, I think. And with that one, Early Bird, comes in at 19.
This is kicking it with the Amish.
Interesting perspective. I'll start with that. But it also kind of, in my view, kind of calls for more symmetry. And I take it that the sitter is over on the right and somebody else is taking the reins of the horse. Whereas in this case, I'm really looking to see the path function as kind of a vanishing perspective element. Again, situating itself with a composition that's kind of centric. And so to me, I found it a little bit awkward. I like the fact that it illustrates the kind of fall colors, the autumn light of, if it's Amish, it's in Ohio or Western Pennsylvania. And so I like the sense of place that it provides. The use of the reflection on top, if that's what it is pretty clever. So I like the ambiguity of the vantage point. There's just a little bit of awkwardness on the composition itself that makes me a little reticent to give it a higher score. But so it's interesting, but I think it could be a little bit tweaked. And it could be a situation where the photographer doesn't have much choice in terms of the vantage point. Now, I noticed in the email I received from Greg that you guys are pretty much open to Photoshop content, if I'm understanding the group ethos, if you will. And I'm always one to encourage that. I think we live in the age where Photoshop is welcomed, even if it's changing the content, as long as it's not cited in terms of kind of a journalistic or documentary practice. I think for purely an aesthetics reasoning, there was a few things that, in my view, that could have been enhanced with Photoshop, but it would be kind of a wholesale, kind of a deep dive into Photoshop. But otherwise, it's interesting, but I think there's a few things that prevent it from being successful. And with that in mind, kicking it with the Amish comes in at 16.
A metaphor for all life.
I'm interested in that metaphor. I like how this one occupies the kind of rule of thirds with the head of the branch kind of coming down, kind of just touching the stream. So I like the composition in that regard. In my view, I'd like to see the snow part to be a little bit pure. It looks like it kind of got grayed down. And it also looks maybe a tad over sharpened. I think oftentimes that when I look at a lot of photographs, whether it's students or in a situation like this, there seems to be a tendency to kind of really sharpen it. And as a result, I think the downside of doing that makes the image just a little bit more hyper or busy, for lack of a better descriptive term. There's a lot going on with this particular photograph, but the main point of emphasis is that nice branch that kind of comes down, starting near the upper left corner and kind of coming down, occupying a little bit of the center. And then, like I say, just kind of hovering just above the stream. The shutter speed in use, I think, is adequate. Sometimes there's a tendency to make that water be that silky smooth, slow shutter speed motion. That tends to get overused, in my opinion. But in this case, not using it, I think, adds to the photograph. Metaphor for all life comes in at 17.
Ocean track.
This one, the first glance, I think is one of the most dynamic ones, and it has that kind of punch in the gut type of impact. Having said that, it might shift a little bit towards over the top. And it's obviously meant to be or speak to the fact that it's more about the kind of sensibility that the photographer employed with this particular shot. The sky is very dramatic, good quality of light. For my taste, I think it has a little bit too much, a little bit over processed, but it wouldn't take much to kind of pull back just a bit and let the composition and the arrangement of the light and the colors kind of speak for itself. Because there's a lot of nice things happening here. I like how the upper left-hand corner diagonal kind of meets down at the center point of the tracks. as it meets its vanishing perspective point of view. The area on the right, again, with the sky, I mean, the ocean or the sea, very tranquil. It really does speak nicely to the time of day, and it's pretty well resolved. Just a little, I would just dial it back just a little bit, I think would prevent me from giving it a higher score. And so with the ocean tracks, checks in at 18.
Um, Pelicans at Guadalupe Dunes.
Oh, I got out of order a little bit.
This is number
This one,
7.
number 7, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I like this one because the way the birds kind of define the space, the sky, and then the lower third or the lower strip rather with a little bit of a stream or river.
Might have already gone by. We'll see. You need to
Sorry?
watch.
Do you have soap?
Go ahead, Rudy.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I like the overall composition is interesting, but this is where, this is the type of photo actually that I use in respect to Photoshop. The area on the far right, this is the composition that you have little control over because of the randomness of the birds. And thereby we have an open space on the far right-hand corner occupying almost half of the image and then a third of the top. I think it's a great opportunity, if you're so inclined, as what I wrote in my notes, to occupy that space by moving some of the birds in that direction, not replacing them necessarily. But again, that's something that, you know, is debated in terms of how you alter one's composition, and it may or may not be with one's satisfaction. But nonetheless, again, I like to think of it as recompositing kind of after the fact and using another tool from the toolbox that you can apply to making an image a little bit more resolved, if you will. Otherwise, I like the low contrast colors.
Yeah.
Hey, Ed and Penny, you need to mute yourself if you're going to talk.
Thank you.
I thought,
Yeah, so overall, the quality of light is nice. I feel it's maybe in terms of the color balance, it's a little bit, I detect a little bit of a green tint and playing a little bit, if you're using Camera Raw to do your preliminary edits, the tint slider a little bit to the right, if I can offer a little bit of how to, just maybe give it just a little bit of pink and a little bit of greater blue with the color temperature, I think would nail this one a little bit closer to a higher score. With that in mind, I gave it an 18.
This is Union Sugar Silos.
Yeah, this one, I like the strong vertical composition. It's kind of a classic kind of vanishing perspective image. I really love the shadow right in the middle of this, I don't know what you call the area, the trench, if you will, and the old abandoned tracks. I love the graffiti and the rustic tanks themselves, the discoloration, the oxidation of the metal used, offset against that nice bright blue sky. The silos themselves give you a really great sense of scale, juxtaposed next to the trees on the right midpoint. So there's a lot of interesting things coming up that really define the space and gives one a sense of place as well. I thought this one was pretty well resolved. I love the contrasting colors, the composition. It really does come together quite nicely. As a result, I give it a 19.
This is Wreck of the Estero.
Yeah, I love the color palette. I think it's a nice juxtaposition within the warm rust colors against the various blues. The hint of a reflection in the foreground middle point. It works really nicely. I love the outcropping of the rocks, kind of occupying the foreground, and then going way in the back with a nice strip of land. It's interesting that the flag seems to be kind of fluttering, but the quality of the air, if I can speak to it, looks very still. So I like that kind of tension, if you will, that is elicited by that little bit of a detail. And then the boat itself, this one, I think is the first one that we're looking at that really kind of lends itself to a particular narrative. You know, we can assign or kind of imagine a story behind this ship or this small boat and whatever that may be, you know, and that I think sets it apart from the others at the given moment. The only thing I think I would like with this one is just maybe a little bit of more room to breathe, if you understand what I mean by that, and so far as giving it a little bit more room on either side. I don't know if this was cropped to this position or taken in camera, but it just feels just a tad crowded, especially with the foreground. I mentioned I like all the rocks, but just backing up just a tiny bit or zooming out, whatever the case may be, would give it just a tiny bit more room for it. Having said all that, I think it was well processed, and it's just stopped short again a little bit over the top. So I think the user, the maker of the image, pulled a stop right at the point where it felt comfortable. And with that, it's a 19 in my book.
This is, excuse me, a street to explore, excuse me, a new street to explore.
Yeah, this one, I was hoping the preview would have been a little bit larger so I can really delve into the finer details of it. I love the little spot color kind of going from the foreground all the way back to the back, the little greens, the magentas, the oranges, the lavenders, the assortment of colors that work as really nice accents that begin to define the depth behind the image. Then you got that path or the street, cobblestone street, leading all the way to the back where you have this other building that looks a little bit incongruent to the setting. So I'm not sure if that was photoshopped in. It's intriguing, I'll have to say. And as a result of that, I like that it was either added, or if it's not, it's an interesting juxtaposition, it's an interesting view. I like the title of the piece, kind of, it invites one to explore it. When you include that in the title, it's an open invitation. I like the repeated forms kind of leading back. Again, I just wish I had a bigger preview so I could really, you know, kind of dive into it. It's a nice color palette, and you got a couple. I wouldn't say it's quite street photography, given it is a street, but it's not like an examination of street life per se. But it works. It gives us a sense of place. And with that in mind, I have a street to explore checking in at 17.
Black-capped chickadee.
Yeah, this one, I love the bokeh, the nice shallow depth of field. The branch at a diagonal makes it a little bit more dynamic. And then you got the left one, kind of that, I don't know what that furry ball thing that you call it, but going back towards the center with the leaf. I think it's very dynamic. I love the crisscrossing. And then the bird looking outside the frame to his right, while the body and the legs are perched in one direction. You get the beak going in the opposite direction. So again, makes it very dynamic. The color palette itself is nice and complementary with the colors involved, offset by the black white treatment of the bird's head itself, and then the beak off into kind of a negative space. Good use of that. I guess the only question I would have is I would like to see a little separation between the tail and then that foreground feature off the branch. Oftentimes with wildlife, of course, you don't have the luxury of taking multiple shots. I know it's a question of timing, but nonetheless, you know, just position the camera a little bit more, open up that little pathway, and it could work. But I understand it's a little bit of a nitpick, but for what it's worth, I think it's always a good cause, a good advice to shift just a little bit one way or the other and try to induce a little bit of separation between foreground elements and your main subject. As it is, we're coming in at 18 with this one.
excuse me, golden hour.
Golden hour. I really like the various elements with the foreground harbor really thin on the bottom portion of the image, and then how the light is hitting all the dwellings. And then of course the outcropping of the mountainside there really does give it a sense of place. I could see this as being kind of a Chamber of Commerce type of photograph for this particular location. And the real nice dramatic clouds that you've employed with this particular shot, and the way the light is hitting the upper parts of the little bit of the range on there. Really lovely, good quality of light. Composition is nice. This one really comes together quite nicely. I like how the various elements, you know, with the ocean and the boats, and then the buildings all have their own little texture, including the sky, where you have the kind of fluffy clouds up in the upper reaches of the sky. Then you have these dramatic, larger clouds in the mid area that they're almost foreboding if the image wasn't so inviting. So with that in mind, this one scores a 20.
20?
Yes.
Okay. Makarska Church. I hope I pronounced that right.
This one I'm not sure what to think of because it appears to be a photograph of a photograph or a print, something of that nature. Because I mean, I like how the space is flattened, but it kind of throws me off a little bit. There's a good, I'll speak to it as a photograph taken. I love the color temperature of it, of the artificial light combined with the ambient light of this particular photograph. Good use of the colors. I love that little yellow right in the center. And then the open door with the solitary figure in the shot. I don't know where Makarska, is it Makarska? Is that, I'm with you, Jim. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly or not.
Yeah, I don't know. I pronounce it Makarska.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to recommend it, but I'm not quite fully on board with it. And I guess I have to clarify that after we have the discussion, the initial discussion about it. But it's intriguing on that level. And so with that in mind, I give it a 17.
Muir Woods Sunbeam.
Beautiful light. This one really kind of speaks to that. It's in no uncertain terms that first and foremost, that's what it is about. I love that feature of the branch in the near center with the rim lighting, really defining that particular branch. And then the sun rays coming through the center. This one is very well executed. It really does give me a sense of place. It's inviting, you know, it's inviting in the sense that one can imagine oneself being at the footstep entering this area. It's a little hot with the bright light right in the lower center part, but given that, doesn't take away from it. You have good detail in the shadows. The colors are very consistent, very kind of monochromatic. I would have been tempted to amp up the oranges just a little bit, just to add an added accenting feature. But otherwise, I have no complaints otherwise, because I think it's well executed, well resolved, and it's a very attractive image. And with that in mind, it scores the 20.
Pelicans at Santa Maria River Estuary.
Yeah, I mean, you guys, no shortage of going out and photographing wildlife of the winged nature. I like the kind of subdued background in particular, and then isolating the bird in flight. So with presumably kind of a shallower depth of field, or that the little hillside is further recessed back in the background, it really does isolate it. Although now that I look at it, it looks like it might have been blurred, Photoshop blur there maybe on the other side of the river or the estuary, and going back, and if it is, I think it's a good choice. And then the band of the estuary itself, where the birds are kind of congregating, works well to define that space and create and contribute to the overall composition. So again, it's a nice example of utilizing the space and defining it by these horizontal bands. You got the sand in the foreground occupying a good third of the image. Then the birds themselves, a kind of narrower strip, but really giving a sense of how crowded this environment is and how the pelicans are kind of dominating that space. And then again, as mentioned, the blurred background. And then of course, the main feature, almost pterodactyl-like bird kind of flying, occupying a majority of the upper part of the image on the right-hand side. Great timing, good sharp focus of the bird in flight, which I know is no easy task. And the composition of it, moving it over to the right, occupying the rule of thirds, where it's occupying the upper right quadrant, where it kind of meets up the right, works very well. So again, well executed with this one. I also gave it a 20.
Catch Me If You Can.
This one kind of intrigued me because I wasn't quite sure if it's like an RC plane or a real plane, because the background is blurred to the degree that it's nondescript. It's kind of a wash of colors. So with that in mind, it's a nice aesthetic treatment of it. Again, it's a small preview. I'm left wanting to see a larger image so I can, again, really get in close with it. But having said that, it's a nice capture. And I'm intrigued by the ambiguity of it because it does entertain the idea that I'm looking at something either from an air show, or should I say maybe not, but I like that level of intrigue with it. I like the muted colors and how the colors of the orange of the prop in front of the plane. And then you got the nice detail of the star, good profile view of the plane kind of during takeoff. And good use of the motion blur, kind of creating, like I said, like I mentioned before, a little bit of a wash. With the small preview, it's hard to kind of get in there and take a look at what I'm in finer detail, but I score it as a 18.
Fall, excuse me, fall calories.
All calories kind of storing away for the winter months, huh? Nice profile. I love this one, works well with the tight crop. It's a squirrel, so there's that, but it's a good shot eating, packing away the calories, as it were. Good use of the shallow depth of field, creating this nice bokeh. And I really do like how the colors in the background kind of like blend and merge into one another. And then as we kind of pull out away from the background, you got different varying levels where the leaves start to show a little bit more detail. So finally, when you get to the body of the squirrel, really nice, sharp, clear focus of, do squirrels have fur? If they do, it's in good evidence, good composition. The branch in a kind of semicircle at the bottom where the squirrel is perched up there. I love how they captured the hand kind of holding the food item. With that in mind, I score it a 17.
Flying High.
Flying high, perfect focus, perfect shutter speed to capture it in good motion. I'm kind of torn a little bit about the placement of it, whether it's just a tad high. I know you don't want it in the center. That would make it a little bit too static. And I keep trying to convince myself that just a little bit down further from the top. But having said that, this one gives it the sense of being really aloft and kind of commanding the sky with this wide wingspan. The color choice or the treatment of the clouds in the sky, with it being blurred just so, and the nice kind of variation of the clouds. You have different types of clouds in the one shot. And I love just a little hint of a pink at the very top. Works quite well. And I'm curious whether the photographer did a couple of versions of this or if the bird was cooperating, as it were, in this environment where you could have captured a horizontal framing. And I'd be curious why the choice of the vertical, and completely open to that choice. But always a photographer's intent is a curious thing to consider, right? Sometimes it's obvious, other times there's a bit of ambiguity behind it, or kind of a personal reason, an aesthetic reason to choose certain framing or orientation. But I think it's highly effective, and with that in mind, comes in at 19.
Safe harbor.
Yes, I like in this one similar to the other one with the golden hour, with the kind of cliffside. I don't know if it's the same artist or it's a different location altogether. The clouds are the only thing that kind of looks similar to the other shot, although it's the same similar kind of view, kind of low, or in this case, you got the middle area of the harbor, kind of shrouded and framed by the landscape, by the foliage and the trees. I like the spire tree on the right-hand side, of the left-hand side, pardon me, kind of pushing the area, the image content in towards the right. And again, it's a nice kind of scenic shot. The only thing I'll say is maybe the sky keeps it from being overly generic. And it also has maybe a pronounced green cast that obviously it's all greenery. But having said that, I think kind of tweaking it just a little bit towards the warm side. And I think it would benefit just by that tad adjustment. But I like the composition. Otherwise, it's a good choice in this one, given that it's a vertical or portrait orientation. And I like how the ridge line in the back kind of defines the outer reaches of the horizon. So in my view, it works pretty well. And where are my safe harbor scores at 18?
Okay.
All right, we have 3 20s to resolve for first, second, and third place.
And then we've got a number, we have an honorable mention in this one, Greg?
Yes, one honorable mention, and those are all 19s.
Right.
Okay, so 20, excuse me, 12, 14,
And 15.
and 15. Of these, we need Rudy to tell us first, second, and third.
I'm going to go with the Muir Woods, safe or golden hour.
As first,
Muir Woods.
Muir Woods first.
first,
And the left one, is that Safe Harbor?
no, that's golden hour.
Oh, golden hour. And then the Soaring Pelican third.
Okay, so golden hour second, and the pelican is third. Okay,
Yeah, and I have to compliment the group for having a good, diverse approach to the subject matter.
all right, so now we need to choose one honorable mention out of, I think it's 4 19s.
Number 1,
Yes,
number 3, number 8, number 9, and number 18. I think that's right.
Ooh, boy, this is a tough one. One honorable mention, huh?
Yep.
yep,
I'll go with the blue because that one really had great kind of visual impact. The
Blue.
horse yeah, is that what it's called?
cool sundown.
Cool Sundown, yes.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's the one with the horse.
yeah,
Right.
Okay.
okay. So we resolved all those. Now
Right.
we'll step through again.
One before we start, I just want to clarify. Make sure that number 15, Muir Woods, was first. Second was Golden Hour,
Yes.
and third was
Pelicans.
Pelicans at the estuary.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Okay, so Jim, you can.
Okay, this is Cool Sundown by Ed E. Powell. Scored 19, and that was an honorable mention.
Nice image.
Very nice.
This is Curious Bluebird by Harold Litweiler. Scored a 14. This is Early Bird by Larry Decker with a score of 19. This is Kicking It with the Amish by Frank Tromp and 16. Metaphor for All Life, Cheryl Decker, and a 17. Ocean Track by Kevin Miller and an 18. Pelicans at Guadalupe Dunes by Jeannie Sparks and scored an 18. Union, excuse me, Union Sugar Silo by Tony Martindale, a score of 19. Wreck of the Estero by Gregory Doudna and a 19. A New Street to Explore by Harold Litweiler and scored a 17.
What are you, sir?
Black Capped Chickadee by Frank Tromp, an 18. Golden Hour by Larry Decker, scored a 20 and second place. It's a nice photo, Larry. Really
Congratulations.
Nice. Yeah. Muir Woods Sunbeam by Kevin Miller.
No,
Scored a 20.
No.
no,
I'm sorry.
This is Mariska Church.
I'm sorry. I jumped. Yeah, you're right. Mariska Church by Cheryl Decker.
It's Makarska.
Okay,
Makarska. Yeah.
Makarska.
And you asked Rudy about this. It is a photographic image. I took it into did a high definition on it to make it a little more interesting and artsy. And so it's not a photo of a photo, it is a photo.
Yeah, though I was
So it's just
intrigued by
like
the
for
process.
a little bit more artsy look to it, that's all.
Well, it definitely creates a added level of ambiguity, which I found attractive.
Thank you, thanks, I appreciate that.
Okay, so now this is Muir Woods Sunbeam by Kevin Miller. Scored a 20 and it was first place.
first place.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, Kevin.
Yeah, nice image, Kevin.
Yeah.
Pelicans at Santa Maria Estuary. Jeannie Sparks, a 20 and third place.
Okay.
Catch Me If You Can by Harold Litweiler and an 18.
So what's the story behind this one?
It's actually from the air show.
Yeah.
Is it?
It's
Oh,
a
okay.
P-38.
It's a P-38.
Yeah. I don't know why the picture turned out so small.
Harold, did you
different-
submit them as 1,500 pixels at widest? Because that seems to be why the picture is small.
Yeah, I don't know because
Because that's what the rules are on the website.
Yeah, I'm
I
gonna
sent
send
on
out
a
an
different
email
computer this
because
time.
these images should be 38, 40 pixels by
2560.
2460.
Right.
Yeah. So something-
Harold, I saw the XF information and yours are 400 by something. And so they're very, very,
Very small. Yeah, we
Pixel
need
count.
to get them resized. This is an amazing image. I can see that you panned the camera with this, and I love this. Yeah.
Yeah,
and
it's
turn it
actually
again.
48 megapixels, so it's a huge file. So I don't know, something happened in the.
Harold, do you
Didn't
use a Mac?
Yeah,
Okay, well, if you email via Mac, by default, it compresses everything.
that's what happened. Because usually I send it on my iPad, and this time I sent it on my Mac, and that's
Yeah.
probably what happened. Yeah.
No, the Apple email just shrinks everything.
Okay.
You got a choice on the Mac. You have a choice of 4 sizes. You have to look for the line where you do that.
Yeah.
I send mine from a Mac and it seemed to be sized. I had to send them twice
But I,
because
Well, you know, I never.
I
This is the first time
save
I've ever
mine
done
to
it,
the
though.
desktop before I send them.
Yeah, I'll have to look.
That's how you get around it. Save it to your desktop and send it from there.
Oh, okay.
And we need to update the website with the new dimensions, just in case.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually went on there and was looking at it. I'm going like, no, those are old dimensions. I know we can go bigger than that.
You're totally right, Jeannie.
Okay, so we haven't finished, I believe. We got.
Nope.
So the next one is Fall Calories by Frank, and it's 17. Flying High by Jeannie, and it's a 19. And the last one is Safe Harbor by Larry Decker, an 18.
Nice images, everybody.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Could you go back to that flying high one? Rudy had a question about why I put it up, put the bird up there so high. I'd actually started with a triptych on this, and I had 3 images of the bird stacked on top of each other. And we're having a competition at the end of the year for diptychs and triptychs. So I thought, well, I don't want to enter a triptych right now because I'm going to enter that at the end of the year. So maybe I'll just enter one of the birds, and that's the way I did the portrait
So in the triptych,
orientation.
where are the birds placed on in the frame?
Well, I had them placed from lower right to the center to upper left. So you kind of did a little triangular type of thing, like the bird was
Okay.
taking off and flying up like that.
Mhm.
And with lines in between them so that they each had their own frame. But I thought I would just try putting this bird by itself for this competition.
Yeah.
And I dropped in that background. It was a gray sky.
Good to hear. I love that. Yeah.
Thank
I
you.
like sky replacement. It's like take liberties with your images.
I did on this one. The other one that the pelicans that from the side, you said I had extra room over there and fill it in. I was actually trying to get a more photojournalistic one on that because I'm going to use some of these photos for a project I'm working on to document life at the estuary. So some of my, the other 2 were almost just basically out of camera. I didn't make any major changes to them because I'm probably going to use those in that project.
Right. Yeah, you got to be careful with certain aspects of Photoshop and manipulation.
Right. Yeah. All I did on the other ones was just a little bit of lightening and toning. I didn't realize that one shifted into the green area. I have to look at that again and
Okay, here we go.
retint it.
Okay, we're going to go through monochromes. We have 14 of them. Okay, this is the first image.
I have to
Drive-in.
say,
The title is Drive-in.
drive-in, right? Which you don't find too much anymore.
Nope.
I found just before I wanted to just say that the black and white or the monochromes really brought out the competition, the competitiveness with everybody. With drive-in theater, I thought it was a good choice of using the sepia tone treatment to it because it almost becomes a kind of a nostalgic type of setting. You know, for those of us who remember actually going to a drive-in theater, it's a great composition. I love the foreground and all the texture with tire tracks and whatnot, occupying the lower kind of fifth of the image. And then the way the composition is set up with the back of the screen on the right with the kind of rusticated text drive-in theater. And then the feature of the marquee on the left in the center portion of the building, the vertical building as well. And just that little hint of a palm tree, you know, kind of at the corner gives it a sense of place. And we often think of the drive-in and of course the palm trees together, kind of almost spelling out California, right? You know, it's like, I don't know when the drive-in theater was invented. Maybe it was in California, but nonetheless, it does provide that sense of place. So I think it really comes together really nicely on that. The perspective, that the angle of view kind of looking a little bit up from the not quite ground level, but nicely resolved. And I give it a 19.
New construction.
New construction, it kind of speaks to me. You know, there was the movement called New Constructivism, you know, in the, I think it was in the 40s and centered around kind of, you know, Soviet life.
Right.
And as a result, they kind of harken back to my kind of art history education. And I really, excuse me. I like the my voice is going, leaving me. I like the off-kilter angle that you chose to photograph this in the real strong graphic nature. I'm going to get a refill.
Yeah, get some water, Rudy.
We can wait.
Had to give a demo today for a couple classes, so I'm kind of lectured out. But as I started to say, this is kind of really good use of a bold kind of graphic, both in its composition and in the contrast. You got the strong highlights of the certain areas with the very deep shadows, and then the scaffolding in the right on the mid to left. And let me see what I got on my notes. Yeah, it's like I put down that the odd or off-kilter perspective really works to emphasize the nature of the composition. So it nicely resolved, and I scored it a 19.
Octopus.
I almost wish you didn't title it Octopus and let the viewer make that discovery, right? Because it has its own element of charm. I mean, it's kind of I think it would conjure up octopus to a majority of the viewers of it. But I think, and it's kind of an odd criticism, I should say, because it's not really about the image necessarily. But having said that, a kind of coy, untitled #1 or whatever it might be as part of a series, I think it would be kind of interesting. And again, the viewer comes to it without an expectation, and maybe in their mind they entertain the idea, oh wow, this looks kind of like an octopus or something organic or something, you know, from the animal kingdom, because it's really a wonderful image. And I love the contrast of it and the all over composition kind of emanating from the center and moving out to the edges and creating this, not quite a Jackson Pollock kind of composition, but almost headed towards there. Good choice of the depth of field, where on the areas receding to the back or out of focus, not competing with the main emphasis of the tree branches, bark. I don't know if it's a tree that's been fallen over. Very, I don't know if you guys have seen the movie Pan's Labyrinth, but it kind of brings to mind certain elements of that anthropomorphic nature of trees. And you can almost imagine kind of a Sleepy Hollow kind of, we're approaching Halloween. So this, kind of lends itself to that kind of discourse or potential for a narrative. So very nice. Octopus came in at 19.
Polo.
Polo, I love the motion blur. And really, this really speaks to the action. It really creates a strong dynamic, with the horses. It's kind of almost a blending of the two horses together. It's like when you do a motion blur, they occupy the same space at a different time. And then, so very dynamic in that regard. The only thing I would have probably liked to see just a little bit more contrast. Although, having said that, I like the kind of ghosting effect of the lower third of the animals, of the horses. But it really kind of creates this element of action and competition. You kind of get a sense of the intensity of the sport. So with that in mind, I think it works well. I think this is also another one that I would have liked to see a kind of landscape orientation or horizontal, just to kind of give it a little bit of space in front of the horses so that they're going somewhere off the frame instead of the square or roughly close to a square format. But nonetheless, I think the essence of it works really well with the strong pan, slow shutter, or whether it's a Photoshop induced blur. In either case, I think it was a good call for all the points I made. So Polo checks in at 19.
Portland Head.
This one comes together in such a way that it is almost perfect in terms of its technique and execution. It's like the tonalities behind this image are all there. We've got good shadow detail, highlight detail. The lighthouse is not blown out by any means. It's also a nice photograph where you got the foreground kind of in that classic, almost like a S shape coming down, or inverted S coming down from the center bottom portion, kind of leading up in almost winding fashion right up to the lighthouse. And then the building to the lighthouse just to the left of it. I think the only thing that I would have entertained is maybe the idea of a more dramatic sky. But having said that, I like how the sky has at the horizon very light and has a slow kind of gradation to a deeper, darker shade of gray or dark gray. It's also one of those photographs that is kind of calendar ready. And so as a result, it becomes a little generic. And I would like the question becomes for the photographer is how do I make it my own, right? And how to do that? Do I use a slow shutter speed, maybe get the water to be a little bit more pronounced? I don't have a good answer for that question. Maybe a different time of day, play with the quality of light, try a different cropping perhaps. But for all the reasons, I think it's still executed really well, but it's technically astute. And as a result, maybe it lacks a little bit of je ne sais quoi. It's just a little bit of added personality to it. Having said all that, Portland Head scores an 18.
Rural Moon.
Yeah, Rural Moon, I like the different elements that kind of clash. The one thing that really stands out to me is how the moon is kind of almost couched right in between the shadow and the what do you call this little spout kind of chimney kind of thing, or whatever it might be. But you can see how the composition moves forward in a diagonal, so it's pointing at the moon. And then you got the kind of rusticated rooftop, kind of like the corrugated steel of the roof. And so it gives it a real kind of aged look to it. And rural moon kind of speaks to that in the title. You get this nondescript sky kind of occupying where the moon is. It kind of creates a place for the moon. The one detail that I noticed that I really appreciated was the wire, the baling wire or whatever it may be. It's just a little detail, and it's not readily noticeable until you really spend time with it and dig into it. I also like how the modeling of the rooftop of the aluminum, the corrugated steel is how I referred to it. But all these wonderful little modulation of light and darks. I'd almost like to see the camera pull away just a little bit and get more of the sense of the roof lining, because it is kind of bordering on abstract with the representational, two elements kind of competing against each other. But it's also a good example of kind of creating a juxtaposition that has, potential for added interest. Rural Moon scores an 18.
View from Sacré-Cœur.
And it's a really arresting view. It's a view that goes on forever. I really love at the very horizon, you have what appears to be a more contemporary skyline, kind of juxtaposed to the middle ground, which looks doesn't look vintage by any means, but it almost has that appearance. The vantage point works extremely well with this kind of a nice sweep down to the middle ground and then off into the background, and then the upper third occupied by a nice kind of, not necessarily angry sky, but a dramatic, if not at least a sky that begins to become foreboding to some degree. I love the people in the foreground kind of occupying the space, signaling it as the kind of public environment. I really like this image for those reasons and more. I love it because it's an invitation to look into it and gaze into the details, and one can spend a lot of time kind of looking at it. I would love to see this as a print, kind of beyond the modest size of a 16 by 20, something like a 30 by 40, because I think it has that much detail to hold that level of interest. And so with that in mind, I think I scored this a 20.
Three balconies.
Yeah, this one came to mind like the other one I mentioned with the new construction. This one is really kind of Bauhaus in nature, really kind of industrial looking, even though it's a residential environment, but very graphic, kind of an excellent observation of how you can utilize strong shapes with shadow and light to create a really interesting, arresting images. I love the clouds and the reflection of the glass on the left, if that's what it is, if I'm reading it correctly. If not, it's whatever it may be, it's interesting. But what really makes it are the balconies, kind of creating this negative space behind it, and the deep black and the deep shadow. I mean, you couldn't get more graphic. It wouldn't surprise me if the same artist is behind the new construction. But having said that, it really kind of demands one's attention, because it is so graphic, so contrasty, and very successful on those merits. And so with that in mind, the three balconies scores a 20.
Amanda, number 15.
I love the experimental nature of this one, with the strips kind of cut and then reassembled, if that's the process, or if it's all in Photoshop, which it probably is. But nonetheless, I like how the composition works to bring into question, what we're looking at, if it's the same person or a composite of different people or a composite of the same, or some of it, the perspective has changed, kind of brought closer to the viewer while other part of the space kind of recedes. And you left the kind of sharp division of space in between the three faces or the four elements of it, with the hand on the far right kind of in bright light, the next segment in dark shadow. Very interesting image. It's another image that I want to spend some time with. I love the gaze of the sitter as well. And then the light hitting it, where it kind of borders on this kind of chiaroscuro effect on the right side of the face, where you almost have that little Rembrandt lighting on the upper cheekbone. And of course, the gaze going outside the frame works really nice. I think it comes together quite nice. If we can call it experimental at this day and age, maybe not, but it's a nice technique. And in this case, I think it works. The pensive gaze really adds to, or the cut up complements the pensive gaze. It's a nice treatment. It's very, I don't want to use the word unique necessarily, but it certainly from what the images that we're viewing tonight kind of sets itself apart along those lines. And this one also scores a 20.
Excuse me. Arcadia coastline.
Yeah, this one kind of reminds me a little bit of the coastline where the lighthouse was at. And I'm not quite sure if it's resolved, because there seems to be a lot going on. You got the dramatic skies, you got all these textures, you got the water splashing up against the shoreline. There's a lot going on. It's very dynamic in those respects. It's well executed in terms of its tonalities. I almost want to see less of the foreground and a little bit more of the sky, because it just tends to feel a little bit crowded as a result. I like the little outcropping of the trees on the far right, but just a little bit more headroom, I think, would prevent it from being maybe a little bit too much in my face, so to speak. Because I think it's an attractive image, and there's more work to be done with this one to kind of push it a little bit further. A little bit of a tough call, but I think that there's a lot to recommend it, but also just a little bit of tweaking. I think it scores an 18.
Lakeside.
I love the peaceful nature of this. This is one of those photographs that really kind of can speak to that, the still water, solitary boat with no figures in there, just the one bird coming up at the front end of the boat. Kind of, you can almost imagine it, they sweep up towards the sky. I think it's very well composed. I love the little post coming out of the water and its kind of reflective twin, on the surface of the water. Works really nice. A lot of stuff going on with this particular photograph. I'm kind of concerned at what I see on the far upper right-hand corner. It almost looks like there was a cloning effect, kind of repeated. Can't say for sure, but who's ever made it can correct me if I'm wrong. But again, I think the main attraction to this photograph is this sense of serenity that it speaks to. Oftentimes we can look at photographs and say something is very dramatic, something that's over the top. This one is completely kind of serene and stable, and it's inviting in those respects. It's almost like, I kind of want to be there, right? And it's a good choice to convert to black and white as well. With the Lakeside, I scored it a 19.
Ranch mailboxes.
I love the deadpan title that you assigned this one. Ranch mailbox is kind of literal, it's what it is, but it's so much more. The composition is very attractive. I love the use of the shadows from the railings, kind of leading our eye towards the center and around the bend. And then we go back to the trees. And again, I'm looking at this and thinking it's infrared, or kind of an infrared effect. And who's ever the maker can correct me if I'm wrong, but the skies have that look to it as well. there's a lot going on here, but there's enough harmony with the elements that it's pleasing to look at. It doesn't really speak to an over-the-top treatment, nor is it too busy for having all the different elements, all the disparate elements as well. Very attractive. I think it's quite nicely resolved. It's kind of a classic composition, but it works. You know, I think there's even, if I recall, an Ansel Adams photograph of mailboxes with their individual stands kind of going around. It's almost a classic black and white trope, but in this case, it's made to good use, put to good use. And I scored it a 20.
Oh, I'm sorry. At the pack.
I'm curious what the pack is, but this image is very well executed. So the textures, the shadow play, these orbs or spheres that are made out of presumably metal and wire. I love the little detail in the background where it says arts, the kind of mysterious deep shadows. I like even how the circle is broken on the far right, but then completed in the middle with these elongated shadows. Very compelling image, and the gradation to the sky, kind of nondescript. And all the little lines of the building itself kind of like patterned with the bordering white, and then the light gray, and then the dark gray, and then the black. Very bold, very graphic. And very kind of tight composition. I think this was very well executed. Also scores a 20.
Blonde woman wearing black hood.
Very literal there. Very nice, soft skin, very well executed. I love the gaze kind of going back towards the viewer. This real subtle smile, a nice detail in black hood, and then even in the hair, which is kind of a tough thing to pull off. Be able to get that detail and not make the hair gray. So the white, the soft glowing skin, very nicely, well executed. There's a really kind of rapport with the viewer and the camera with the sitter going back. So I think it's a nicely resolved image with respect to how it conveys this kind of relaxed situation or kind of relaxed rapport with us, the viewers of the camera. So the redirected gaze, I think, works extremely well. The frontal view really come together quite nicely. I scored it at 19.
Okay.
We've got 5 20s in which we have to do first, second, third, and honorable mention.
I told you guys were competitive with this one. This was
Yeah.
a tough category.
They are number 7, number 8, number 9, and 12 and 13.
You're looking for 20s, right?
These are all 20s. That's correct. So you need to
Well,
pick
why
first,
not,
second, third,
missing
and
an
honorable
image
mention.
here?
I don't think I gave the
Oh,
rural moon a 20. Did I?
I'm sorry?
Rural Moon. No, it was an 18. That's wrong.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Rural Moon was an. Oh, I'm sorry. You're right.
So I need to reselect everything.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So it was
Seven.
7,
The balcony one, I think.
8, and 9, then 12 and 13.
Yep, that sounds right.
Yeah.
Huh. I'm not getting what I expect. I'm only getting 2. Huh. All right, let me start over. Okay, 7. 8. Oops.
9,
9,
12, and 13.
13. There's all 5 of them. Okay. We need a first, second, third, and honorable mention. Good
Oh,
luck,
man.
Rudy.
I know. Scroll through them again, please.
Okay.
These are all worthy. Okay. Think I'm gonna. Hey. Just because I think the mailboxes speak to kind of like this classic arrangement of elements, and I'm gonna go with that one as the first place. At the
Okay.
back,
The mailboxes?
Yep. First place.
Okay.
and then at the pack, number 2.
Second.
Second. Okay.
And then I'm gonna go with the portrait of the reassembled.
Amanda
Yeah.
is third.
And then the balconies, honorable mention.
Great.
Balconies?
Balconies, yes.
Mhm. And I think all 4 of those could have been reordered any which way. But sometimes you gotta make the call.
Okay, I'm sorry. This is Drive-In by Kevin Miller, a 19. New Construction by Alan Upshaw and a 19. Octopus by Cheryl Decker, a 19.
I really like that
I'm not-
image, Cheryl.
I'm not seeing a change. Is anybody else seeing the change?
Yeah, it's changing.
Thank you.
Oh.
Oh,
You might have some latency problem.
Oh, yeah, now it changed.
Yeah. This
Day
is
late,
Polo-
dollar short.
This is Polo by Tony Martindale, 19. Portland Head by Greg Doudna at 18. Rural Moon by Ed E. Powell, 18. View from Sacré-Cœur at 20 by Jim McInnes.
Where is that?
That's in Paris. It's Sacré-Cœur. Behind me is the Sacré-Cœur church. It's a landmark in Paris.
Oh, okay.
And down the street there, that's the Pigalle Pigalle area. That's where the sex district is. Just for those who might be interested.
Let me make a note of that.
Yeah.
You're very familiar, Jim.
Okay, balconies. Alan Upshaw, 20.
And honorable mention.
Honorable mention. I'm sorry.
How much processing did you have to do with this one?
Virtually nothing. It's from a point and shoot camera, and I don't use Photoshop, so I just
Oh,
use,
so you just caught the right light, huh?
yeah, I try to get it in the camera. Right. I think I might have boosted the dynamic range on the camera or something.
I'm sorry. No, I don't know. Probably could be that is my vision. I think the balcony on the top, the chair is shaking because it's not in perfect in focus.
Hmm.
I don't know.
Amanda, number 15 by Jim McInnes, scored a 20, third place. Arcadia Coastline by Gregory Doudna, an 18. Lakeside, Ed E. Powell, a 19. Ranch Mailboxes by Tony Martindale, scored a 20 and first place. And I was with him when he made that.
So was I. In fact, I've got a version of it that wasn't in, this is, it was just in black and white.
Infrared.
And I called mine RFD, Rural Farm Delivery.
Very good, Tony.
Yes, infrared converted camera.
Oh, really?
This is At the Pack by Alan Upshaw, 20.
I
and
like it,
second.
Alan.
I really like that, Alan.
Yeah,
That is
very
amazing.
good.
Alan, that's a
So-
great image.
So what is the pack?
The
Pacific.
Performing Arts Center.
Performing Arts Center, Cal Poly.
Okay, all
I
right.
should just say that I didn't do much processing on this one either. It was really a sunny day, and I just boosted up the blacks, and I used a 9mm lens.
Oh, wow, yeah. So you're right on top of that foreground ball.
This one is Blonde Woman Wearing Black Hood by Jim McInnes, and it's a 19.
Very good.
That's it, folks.
All right.
That's all she wrote.
Hey, but before I forget, Rudy, I want to ask a question. You used the word resolved
Mhm.
many times. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Well, there's certain photographs have a certain objective, right? And from my point of view, I have to try to determine what that is. And so that's why I use the word resolved, just in terms of, you can think of it as being a certain level of success within a photographic image. So when I have a critique at school, I look at student work and we'll read or take a reading of a particular photograph, right?
Mhm.
And if we identify what that objective of that photograph is, we can determine how resolved, which means do we arrive at a resolution or a satisfactory resolution to that photograph. And sometimes I know with my own work, I'll tinker with it, do alternatives that I'll explore, and then finally I'll reach at a point where I think it's resolved.
It's met your goal, basically, is what you're saying.
I don't know if I go that far.
Okay. Or
That
close
would
to
be it.
making your goal.
There you go.
Yeah, very good.
Well,
So,
Rudy, you
just-
did a great
just to go-
job as a judge. I really enjoyed all your criticisms, comments, positive statements. Thank you very much for doing this for us tonight.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was very
well,
good.
Thank you
My
very
pleasure,
much.
guys.
Yeah.
You guys do great work, and I hope you continue with it and up the ante.
We'll
Thank
try-
you,
Just
Rudy.
glad that we don't have to ruin film anymore.
Oh, I do.
Really appreciate your time in helping us and your knowledge and talent and experience. Thank you so much for sharing with us.
Yeah. Well, if you're so inclined, drop me a line, and once you look at my site, I'd be curious to hear what you guys think.
I'm going to have a look at your website. I'm excited about that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. You did a good job.
Thank you.
Oh, guys.
Appreciate it.
I'm going to
All
check
right.
out now. Good night, everybody.
Yeah, good night.
Good night,
Thank you.
Deckers.
Mhm.
I'll try to make it down to the, when is the photo exchange going to have their exchange?
I don't know. We haven't had much talk about that
Yeah,
because we skipped the last two because of COVID.
right.
So I'm not sure. I'll if I remember, I'll ask on Thursday.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that would be next year, I'm assuming.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna sign off to you guys. Good night.
Okay, Harold.
Harold,
Bye.
All right,
Bye,
guys.
Okay,
guys take
I'm
care.
signing off
Thanks
too.
for having
Good night,
me.
everybody.
hi, Jeannie.
Bye. Bye.